Hi, everyone. We're just going to get started in a couple minutes here. Let folks transition from their previous session. Alrighty, I've got 12:45 Mountain my time. I will just kick into things and people can hop in as they choose to arrive. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Kirkpatrick. I'm a principal consultant with Heller Consulting in our digital practice area. Heller offers strategy, implementation, and change management practices to nonprofits and higher education advancement teams. We've delivered over 3,000 projects across almost 3 decades in operation. Prior to joining Heller, I spent over 20 years in technology and marketing leadership roles in nonprofit and higher ed, much of that with the Canadian Cancer Society, where I led marketing and digital efforts. I'm coming to you today from just northeast of Toronto in Canada. So welcome to any fellow Canadians out there. Hope you've all had a great conference this week. I know this is pretty late on a Friday, but hopefully I can give you something to send you off into the weekend curious about to explore next week. If you have any questions throughout today's call, please drop them in the chat. We may get some time at the end, but if not, I'll get a copy of the chat log and make sure that I follow up with any questions post-conference. Many of the strategy projects I work on at Heller involve the development of technology roadmaps and solution selections. And a common theme that I see in our clients' goals is to achieve a 360-degree view of constituents. It's a promise that software has been making for decades, and it's often the first goal that we hear from clients that are looking for tools like a CRM. I'm sure it's something that you've chased at one point in your career as well. But today's topic focuses on another form of technology, which promises to solve that same age-old 360-degree view challenge. It's not widely found in the nonprofit sector from what I've been able to see, but it has been around in the market in the for-profit sector for approximately 10 years. These products are called customer data platforms, or we're going to refer to them as CDPs for short. I'm hoping that most of you are here today because you don't know what a CDP is, or you're at least curious about how a CDP, once you know what it is, could benefit your organization. So if that describes you, you're in the right place. My goal for today's session is to make sure you leave with a knowledge of what a CDP is, how it might be different from other similar types of systems that you may or may not have in your organization, and an understanding of the use cases that fit in the nonprofit space. We'll start off by talking about exactly what a CDP is. And the big challenge of understanding what it is comes from the fact that there are so many different types of CDPs. So I'm going to break those down for you. And then lastly, we'll talk about those common use cases on how you might be able to create value for your organization. So let's start with the definition. The CDP category is actually so diverse that there is an institute that formed back in the mid-20 teens, and it emerged to establish some kind of common definition within the space. So you can see here that the description that the CDP Institute uses is packaged software that creates persistent, unified customer database that's accessible to other systems. So if we break that down, first we're talking about packaged software. CDPs are considered packaged in that they're usually bought and controlled by a business user in the organization, most often marketing. This distinguishes it from something like a data warehouse or a data lake, which is usually more custom built by the IT department. The packaged nature of the system makes sure that it's easier to deploy and change as new needs emerge. And you'll still need to cooperate with your IT department on deployment, but usually once it's set up and maintained, you'll get vendor support for the majority of this, or it'll be easy enough that you could use this within your business user community. The second piece is that idea of a persistent unified customer database. So the CDP creates that comprehensive view of each customer by bringing in data from multiple systems, linking it together and relating customers so that you know that the data from one system matches the data from another and they both belong to the same constituent. CDPs work primarily with data gathered by the company's own systems about identified individuals, but they may also include data from external sources and sometimes anonymized data that might be web traffic or cookie data related, and try to pair those together with an identified person. So the CDP is able to retain all that detail indefinitely, although users may choose to restrict how much is stored and how long it's kept. And lastly, the piece about accessible to other systems. So data is stored in a CDP so that it can be used by other systems, whether that's for analysis or managing customer interactions. So that's the important third piece of a CDP. And this next diagram makes it really clear to see what the three minimum attributes are that at a bare minimum define what a CDP is. So it's bringing in or ingesting data from other systems, unifying that information to create constituent profiles that give you that 360-degree view, and making that data available to other systems, whether it's for segmentation, modeling, analysis by data systems. So it's ultimately about the customer, and that's hence the name of the products. Whether you call it a 360-degree view, a golden record, profile unification, take your pick. They're all really about the customer. Now, a lot of this may sound familiar, and maybe you're thinking that you've already have a system in your mix that does this a lot. So there's a lot of acronyms and terms used in the world of data management that can lead to some confusion on which is the right approach for your organization. The features I've used to describe CDPs distinguish them from other systems that work primarily with their own data, such as a customer relationship management system, systems that store only limited details for limited periods of time, and include lots of externally hosted high volume of data, like a data management platform where you're keeping cookies and tokens from ad servers. Systems that do not maintain any data in a permanent database, like an integration platform, and systems that interact directly with customers, so email, mobile app, web content management systems. So you might be saying, why do I need a CDP if I already have some of these systems? So if you have a CRM, well, these primarily work with data that's entered more directly by users, typically in a relational database. Hence the word relationship management. It's usually about your fundraising teams that would be adding contact details about meetings and phone calls that they've had, trying to build that base of knowledge. So yes, CRMs have integrations to bring some transaction and engagement data from other systems, like maybe your email platform, but most have a rigid data structure and really aren't easily scaled up to the volumes of data and the speed required for a CDP. Now, a DMP or a data management platform, these are typically designed to collect and store, activate first, second, and third party data, largely cookies and tag data, but not full transaction and event histories. So these systems are purposefully limited to be anonymous in order to avoid privacy issues. And the third type I've got on this system is integration platforms. So similar to a CDP, these systems are more about moving data from one system to another. But that's really all they're doing. It means they're helping you move the data, but they're not storing the data. They're just passing it through. So that's where they fall short of what a CDP could deliver. Then we've got ideas like data warehouse and data lakes. And certainly the definitions here don't apply necessarily to all things, because even then the data warehouse space is shifting with cloud-based approaches, but typically data warehouses are more about structured data in a database format, not as strong with unstructured data, although the more modern cloud-based approaches are good for both. But they're used for things like call center notes, website logs, but they are generally more difficult to modify, making them unsuitable for the rapidly changing nature of customer information that you might want to process in near real time. And data lakes store more of that raw data, but without the additional processing that's needed to assemble those unified profiles. So you end up layering additional tools on to extract the data to build those profiles within the system. Many CDPs are actually using data lakes as a starting point to house the data and then adding that structured layer on top of it. And finally, we've got a couple like email platforms that are more limited to storing customer lists with tags and email history. Sometimes you may not even have a name, which makes it difficult to do unified profiles like you'd expect in a CDP. The email address is sometimes that customer ID, and that's just simply not adequate to resolve against many of the other systems you might try to pair with data from other places. And finally, marketing clouds and suites. So this is where you have possibly different parts of a broader cloud-based system that are tackling different channel level issues. You may have an SMS portion, an email portion, and they could include a data piece that is a CDP that's part of the suite. If you look at Salesforce Marketing Cloud, for a while at least, there was a CDP portion of that, but it's been relabeled as Data Cloud. So they've tried to show that that's a very relevant piece for marketers to handle things like the segmentation that plays back into your Marketing Cloud and your SMS tools. So we talked a bit about attributes that define a CDP, but I mentioned there's many different types, and that's why it makes the market so confusing. So the CDP goes into a bit about describing different types of CDPs, and there are many other definitions and diagrams like this, but this is sort of the one that the industry accepts as a baseline. So on the left, you'll see some of the types of data sources you might consider and have in your organization that you'd want to bring into a customer data profile. So things like point of sale terminals for collecting donations. Your website may have forms that you're bringing in. Your Salesforce or Dynamics marketing tools could be brought in. And on the outbound side, on the right-hand side, you could be pushing that to an email marketing tool, to advertising targeting on social media or through Google, or you may want to pull it into a tool like Power BI and do some analysis with it. All of these sources are being ingested into a central customer database where many of the functions are taking place, and you'll see a few of those listed. But as the market has evolved and CDP products have grown more complex, we see that there's a natural grouping emerging based on what's happening with the data that is being ingested before it's being activated on the right side. So the first grouping is around data CDPs. These systems gather customer data from the source system, link the identities, and then store the results in the database so that it's available to an external system. This is that minimum definition of what a CDP is. Analytical CDPs start adding additional features and functionality related to customer segmentation, sometimes extending to machine learning and predictive modeling, revenue attribution, and journey mapping. And then finally, we have the idea of a campaigning CDP. So that starts to offer the capabilities to deliver personalized messages, outbound marketing campaigns, real-time interactions, and things like product or content recommendations. And a lot of CDPs have grown through acquisition. So what might have started out as a data CDP might have purchased an email vendor, and suddenly they've migrated up into more of a campaign CDP. So the market is constantly shifting, and that's what makes it so complex. In recognition of the fact that there are a lot of organizations embracing big data solutions, so products like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, or Azure Data Lake, a new approach to CDPs has started to emerge that's called composable CDPs. So these aren't actual products, but rather an approach to emulating the functionality of a CDP. So rather than creating yet another database where you would store the data and paying to store it again, a composable CDP is built around the concept of leveraging that data that's already where it's stored in your data warehouse. It involves using a combination of best-in-breed tools to handle the various functions of a CDP, such as ingesting data, identifying identity resolution, and activating the data. So you can also scale and grow the individual functions that you might want to include in your CDP more at your own pace with what your organization can absorb, rather than paying to buy a solution where maybe you can only use a fraction of the capabilities. So you're almost overpaying for what you really need. So how can you put a system like this to work in the nonprofit organization? There's many common use cases for a CDP. Here I've outlined just a few that are relevant to nonprofit organizations. You can see profile unification right at the top, segmentation, predictive modeling and analytics, personalization, and campaign orchestration, which really is all about the things that you might typically do in a system like Marketing Cloud. Measuring and pulling insights from your data, and finally, consent management, which is a really important one, recognizing the privacy first world that we're living in. So profile unification is perhaps the most obvious scenario. This is that 360-degree view use case. So in this scenario, you're using the CDP to bring together data points from your CRM, your digital fundraising, maybe marketing automation, volunteer management, and program systems into a unified profile so you can see everything. Often they feature a timeline. You'll have a card or a dashboard for your individual constituents that will show you the select data points that you've chosen to bring from different systems. So it could be high-level name and address information, but then you may have a column related to the different points of engagement to see their aggregate fundraising history. You might see a timeline of every interaction being pulled live from multiple systems, all aggregated into one timeline. So they might have opened up a service ticket and then the next day they donated. So lots of ways that you can build a profile that suits the needs of your organization. You can further enrich these profiles with additional data. So if you're using a system like Donor Search or iWave, address validation services, or any other third-party source of data, things like Experian, where you could get address information or segmentation data from audiences. Microsoft Graph has lots of great information it can pull from other products it owns, like LinkedIn, to grab some professional content to fill out those profiles. So you really see that the scale of those profiles can really be limitless depending on how many data sources that you're connecting to them. So next we have the notion of segmentation. And this is really huge for your direct marketing teams, but really anyone in marketing or development that wants to take their targeting efforts to the next level. Here you'll take advantage of the marketer-friendly nature of CDPs to empower your marketers and fundraisers to build segments for your campaigns. And what's really nice in this space is that you have features like AI, which have emerging natural language processing being added into these tools. And what that does is it really takes the technical knowledge required to develop segments down a notch so that any business user can do it. As long as you can describe the audience you would like to include in your segment, the AI tool can start to build out the SQL query behind that and start to form the audience for you. So no longer would your teams require a basic or advanced level knowledge of writing SQL queries. That's taken care of for you. You can also build off your segments by letting the system help you create lookalike segments. So if you know you've got a really high performing segment and you just want to prospect within your own database to find more donors or prospects like that, you can use the system to build its own search model to identify brand new segments who would be new users that aren't included in the one you're basing your model off of. And that's a quick way to really grow the segments and find new channels to raise funds. The other piece you can look to the system to do in many cases is for recommendations. So maybe you're fresh out of ideas on what kind of segment you could do, but you know what your goal is. You can pop in a goal and let the system find you the best fit based on some of the analytics that's running in behind the system. If you've got a data team, you're probably really looking forward to the predictive modeling and analytics capabilities that would help you elevate your efforts in this area. You can use all of the interaction data that's being ingested by the system from all your various sources and use that to predict which constituents might be most likely to give and build a segment from that that your marketers and fundraisers can use to raise funds. You can apply models like RFM. So if you're using a reach frequency monetary value model in your direct mail program, many of you may already have a system that's being used to calculate those RFM scores for your contacts, but many of the products in the CDP space have modeling capabilities, so that model generation could happen right within the system using the available data that's being aggregated from the different systems. So that's a handy piece to cut down on your overall technology footprint. Other models like churn scores, where you're looking at the likelihood that a supporter might lapse, are other potential models you could use to then create segments to target those folks that look like they might roll over with a campaign to try to retain them. And in many cases, you can also develop your own custom models. Perhaps you're more focused on the content creation and delivery side. You might want to explore the personalization and campaign orchestration capabilities of CDPs. With near real-time processing, you can realize some potential benefits on your website where you would potentially be able to personalize the experience for your visitors. So leveraging some of that anonymized data that might recognize those visitors when they're hitting your site to draw some data that we know about that person and publish it to help steer their journey on your website towards things that you know are relevant to them. Or perhaps you want to build out journeys directly in your CDP. So some of those types of CDPs that were further along the right of that diagram we looked at, you could have those to control your constituents being passed through a series of automated steps and maximize conversion, recover lapsed supporters, or any other goal that you're setting. That term orchestration is just often used to describe the multi-channel operation type role that the CDP is playing in supporting your marketing and fundraising teams. A CDP doesn't have to stop at bringing the data in. It can actually massage that data and help surface insights about the data to increase its value. So when you're creating those unified profiles, one example of this is you may want to use the features that are there to create calculated values and add blocks like this to your profile. So if you would like to have it displayed the person's lifetime value, maybe if you're using your CRM right now, you have a limited amount of visibility into their total giving because it may only have the gifts that you're entering manually, or it may perhaps be getting the online donations that are coming in as well. But if you've got other sources of data where people might be giving that aren't currently connected, all of those could be integrated through your CDP, and you could have a more holistic approach to displaying the lifetime value, maybe the average amount of donations across all channels of giving, paired with your website engagement or email activity, and being able to see that all together and use those calculated values in combination with other metrics that you brought in to build out more complex targets and segments for your marketing efforts. You can start to explore your different segments and start to reveal insights. One useful piece is comparisons of segments. So you might be able to take a group that you know has a particularly high lifetime value or high average gift, and you might compare that against the segment members that are in there and be able to identify correlations from some of the data points used to see which may be dictated to be the highest drivers of that lifetime value. What are some of the fields that you're capturing about those individuals that are going to be determinants of a high average gift? And then again, use those to create segments. And finally, but not necessarily least important, is consent management. So you probably have many systems in your organization that include some form of an opt-in or an opt-out setting. So are you prioritizing syncing these fields across your organization currently? If you're not, you really should be. As we see an increase in privacy regulations that are being developed regionally and pressure from users to have more control over our relationships with organizations, maintaining a central source of truth regarding your communication consent, whether it's preferences related to specific channels or specific topics, is really key in terms of remaining compliant and respecting our constituents' wishes. So that's an area where CDP can really be that source of truth from that perspective, both collecting the data from different systems, synchronizing it, and then pushing out updates to your various marketing systems so that you're not inadvertently sending out a marketing communication when they might have opted out from another system that's asking the same question. So what if we look at things from the other perspective? What are the downsides of not having a CDP? Well, here are just a few. One thing could be around delays. So when we leave data decentralized or dependent on a central IT function to build out your segments, business teams find themselves waiting potentially days or weeks to have a technical resource freed up to be able to help process that data request. So time to market can be all the difference in some cases, especially when you're reacting. If you're in a case where you might be in a disaster organization that's seeking immediate funding in reaction to something that's happening in the world, you need to be able to segment your data and get your campaigns out the door very quickly. So time can really be a factor that a CDP can help with. Disjointed customer experiences. So marketing and fundraising teams are less able to effectively coordinate their cross-channel experiences. This is just another example where having all that data in one place can ensure that you're seeing where there may have already been activities and you're not cross-promoting something that could be seen as duplicative in the mind of the customer because you had two teams separately approaching them with either similar or different offers at the exact same time. Business inefficiency. Analytics and data professionals spend the majority of their time currently aggregating and cleaning data. And instead, they could be using that time to be more effectively modeling data and analyzing data to improve the level of targeting and sophistication of your campaigns. So that's another really important one. Cross-functional rifts ties a little bit back to the first one regarding the delays, where IT feels blamed sometimes for the fact that business is stagnating through those delays. And finally, the subpar customer service piece. Service may be okay, and your donor relations team is working on what they can, but they're still unaware that there could be other interactions that they're not exposed to through the system they have of what the customer might have done in another stream. So the more that you're integrating, the better your frontline staff can certainly be helping their customers when they're calling in by having that full picture in front of them. And then one not to miss is just this piece around competitive risk. So as other organizations you may be in direct competition with start to embrace tools like this, there is a risk that your organization becomes less customer-centric, and that is certainly a competitive risk that you face if someone else is able to offer that higher level of service and targeting that you aren't able to. I want to leave you with a few follow-up resources for anybody who'd like to learn more about this topic. The first one is just a link through to the CDP Institute website, and there you're really going to find a real wealth of information about the sector, the product category, and the individual vendors in the space if you were to go down the road of looking at an RFP. Secondly, I've listed a few case studies that I've been able to collect over time that will give you some real world examples of leading organizations that are already using CDPs and starting to realize potential from a fundraising and program management perspective. If you've got other examples, I'd certainly love to see them added to the chat, but I found them few and far between to come through, so I wanted to make sure that I share them with the group in case you're looking for some examples. So I want to thank you for your attention today. I know it's late on a Friday. I hope I've been able to pique your interest about the product category. You'll find a copy of these slides as well as my contact information if you'd like to talk further in the collaborative notes area that are related to the session. Enjoy the rest of your time. We do have 4 minutes left. If anybody wants to stick around, I'll do a quick check on the chat to see if we have any questions. So there's a question about recommending some reliable sources to help a very small nonprofit select a CDP. I would start with the CDP Institute for the listing. I think one thing to note about the size of organizations that you typically see using CDPs is that they do tend to skew towards larger organizations with higher volumes of data. So it may not be necessarily as good a fit just because of sometimes the amount of cost that you'd be taking on overhead wise for a smaller organization, but you'll just certainly see more benefit when you have a larger number of data sources that you're trying to aggregate together. And besides budget, what are some of the factors that should be considered in selecting a CDP and vendor comparisons? I think one is going to be looking at their available connectors. Some of these CDP products will have available integrations that have already been pre-built with common sort of inputs and outputs. So tools like Salesforce, Marketing Cloud, Adobe's Marketing Suite, you'll often see those as pre-built connectors. A lot of social media ad suites are also available out of the box because they know there's so many companies that are using them and it's worth it for them to invest in that pre-built connector. But many of them will have options for open API connectors so that you can bring in data from your own custom sources as well as push it back out to any source that you've got as well. I would look a bit at longevity as well and see how long the company's been around, see if they've worked with any customers of a similar size and scale. There are definitely a lot of options, so I would certainly do your shopping. And if you've got a data warehouse product, I would consider some of the ones that have a marketplace entry with those vendors. So if you're using something like Snowflake, you'll see that there's a Snowflake marketplace that has about 3 to 4 CDP products that are sourcing the data directly from Snowflake as opposed to trying to create additional repositories. So that's something that is certainly worth looking at as well. And then I think the composable piece, I've actually got a meeting coming up right after this call to talk to one of the vendors that is in that composable space. Just keep an eye on the market. It is changing quickly and you want to try and keep an eye on it because a lot of the things you'll see from a negative standpoint about CDPs is companies go down the road of doing the implementations and they never actually finish them. So it's just a caution when you're exploring this is to look to vendors with real strong success case studies they can point you to and do some referral checks on those vendors to make sure that the customers are happy, because I think you'll find that it is a complex piece when you're trying to pair all your systems together, that a lot of people never reach the finish line with it. So you want to make sure you've got a company that's in your corner for that. And I've got a couple more here. Just what do I think of Bandera and Panorama? I don't have any specific experience with either of those tools, but I also see we're about a minute out and this session will end right on time. I found that out the other day. If I find any more information, I'll try and share that back through the message boards attached to the conference. So thanks very much for everyone's time today. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of your weekend. Take care.